These hands, now so familiar with stirring apple butter, have done unimaginable things. They have tasted the warm, metallic taste of my own blood, the only sustenance I had for 9 days while buried alive beneath the cold earth. They thought they had thrown me away, a secret to be buried with dirt and stone. But this is not a story about death. This is the true story of how a mother, pushed to the absolute limit, found her way back from hell not to escape, but to reclaim justice. If you are listening from anywhere in the world, leave a comment and subscribe, because there are truths that need to be spread, even if they might shake your beliefs. There are stories that, no matter how painful, must be told. This scar right here on my right arm, you see it? It looks like a faint line, but it's what kept me alive for 9 days under the earth. Days. Can you imagine that? 9 days in a makeshift coffin, without water, without food, with only a thin PVC pipe to keep from suffocating completely. 9 days where every minute felt like an eternity. The first few hours were just despair. I tried to loosen the ropes on my wrists, rubbing them against the rough wood of the coffin. It hurt, but it was better than just lying there waiting for death to arrive. When I finally managed to free myself, I tried to push the lid, but the weight of the earth was already too much. There was no way out. It was on the 3rd day, when thirst was already burning my throat like I'd swallowed fire, that I remembered my brooch, a small metal hummingbird I wore on my dress. The pin was sharp enough. I hesitated. Sweet Lord, how I hesitated. But between dying of thirst and trying to survive, there wasn't much of a choice, was there? I pressed the tip of the brooch against my forearm and made a small cut very slowly. The blood welled up, dark, almost black in that darkness. I brought my trembling arm to my mouth. The taste was metallic, warm, strange. Sounds crazy, doesn't it? I know. But when death is knocking, when your throat burns like hot coals, you'll do things you'd shudder to even think of. It's not about reason anymore. It's instinct. The instinct of a mother, desperate to live to see her daughter again. I threw up the first time. The second time, I managed to swallow. It wasn't water, but it would keep me alive a little longer. That's how I survived, cutting my own arm every few hours, drinking my own blood to keep from dying of thirst. Here in my house, I keep that brooch in an old wooden box on the living room table. Sometimes, when I'm alone, I open the box and look at it. It still has dark stains that never came out. No one understands why I keep an old, dirty ornament, as my neighbor says. No one knows that that metal hummingbird saved my life, that it's the only witness to the hell I went through. The wood-burning stove I have there in the corner of the kitchen is always lit. Even in the heat, there's always a little pot simmering. Some tea, some preserves. They say it's an old woman's habit, but really, it's fear. Fear of the cold, fear of the dark. After 9 days buried, without feeling the warmth of the sun, you never want to feel cold again, never want to be in the dark again. That's why I sleep with the windows open, even in the harshest winter. That's why I have lanterns scattered in every corner of the house. The dark still suffocates me, even after so many years. In the yard, I grow apple trees and all sorts of herbs. Rue, comfrey, rosemary, lemon balm, lemongrass. Some for medicine, some for seasoning, and others for things I learned later. When the neighbors see me tending to my plants, they think I'm just a little old lady who likes to play in the dirt and make her teas. If only they knew that these same hands that pick herbs to heal have also picked them to kill. Anyone who sees me today, minding my preserves and herbs, would never imagine that this same hand that stirs the syrup once served death in small portions, slowly, without rush. A pinch today, another tomorrow, like seasoning in a well-cooked stew, in a pot roast that melted in your mouth. Comfort food, they called it. Little did they know that every forkful brought them a little closer to the end. This is the story few people know, how a seamstress from Havenwood was turned first into a victim, then into an avenger. How I survived, being buried alive for 9 days. How I drank my own blood to keep from dying of thirst. How I was saved by pure luck when a farmer heard my faint groans coming from that PVC pipe. And then how I came back. How I transformed myself. How I served the coldest dish there is. Revenge. calculated, patient, executed drop by drop over the course of 5 years. But to understand how I got to that point, I need to go back. I need to tell you what my life was like before it all happened. How a hard-working woman who only wanted to raise her daughter in peace ended up thrown alive into a hole in the ground just because she was in the wrong place at the wrong time, just because she saw what she shouldn't have seen. And most importantly, I need to tell you how I never, ever, for a single moment, thought about just running away and forgetting. How the rage and the desire for justice consumed me so much that I was capable of things I never imagined I could do, not even in my worst nightmares. The dark eyes that stare back at me from the mirror every day are the same, but they carry marks that time can't erase. Wrinkles in the corners, yes, but also a different glint. A glint of someone who has looked death in the face and come back to tell the tale. My hands, small but strong, still remember every movement. How to hold the brooch to make shallow cuts that would bleed enough without weakening me too much. How to mix the right herbs in the exact proportions so the poison would be slow, imperceptible, impossible to detect. Hands that held my daughter when she was a baby, that sewed clothes for years on end, that later served death disguised as home-cooked food. Because there are moments in life when we change. It's not a choice, it's a necessity. The Abigail who went into that coffin was not the same one who came out. Something died down there, along with my innocence, along with the belief that there's justice in the world. Back then, I worked as a seamstress in a garment factory in Portsmouth. I'd wake up every day at 4:30 the morning, take 3 crowded buses to get to work by 7. I'd come home late at night, exhausted, but happy to be able to provide a decent life for my Sarah. My daughter was 13 at the time, going through that difficult phase, you know? Not quite a child, not yet a young woman. Her father, my husband, had died in a construction accident 2 years before. It was just the two of us against the world. I had lived in Havenwood for over 10 years. I knew every alley, every corner. I knew when the shootouts were likely to happen, when it was safe to go out, when it was better to stay home. You learn to live with danger, to normalize the absurd. I also knew who ran each part of the neighborhood. I knew the gang leaders by sight, of course, like everyone did. I knew that Blade Joe was the most dangerous of them all. A thin man of average height, always with an ugly scar on his neck, which they said was from an attempt to slit his throat when he was younger. He had a reputation for being cruel, for inventing punishments that would give the devil nightmares. That night, I was coming home later than usual. I had stayed for overtime at the factory. We had a large order for school uniforms. My usual route was blocked by a police operation. So I took a detour, a narrow alley I rarely used, dark and poorly lit. That's where I saw 3 men surrounding a 4th, who was on his knees, begging for his life. I recognized Blade Joe right away, with his characteristic way of tilting his head to the side while talking. I couldn't hear what he was saying, but I saw when he pulled out a long, thin knife, the blade that gave him his nickname, and slowly plunged it into the kneeling man's neck. I tried to back away silently, but I stepped on a piece of broken glass. The sound, though small, was enough. 4 pairs of eyes turned in my direction. I ran. I ran like I had never run before in my life. But knowing the neighborhood wasn't enough. They knew it better. 2 blocks later, I was grabbed from behind, a large hand covering my mouth as I was dragged back. I remember the strong smell of weed and sweat, the low laugh in my ear. Well, look what we have here, the man said. A nosy one. They took me back to the alley where the murder had happened. The body was still there, blood forming a dark pool on the dirt ground. Blade Joe approached, studying me as if I were an interesting insect. Mrs. Abigail, the seamstress, he said, recognizing me. I trembled, realizing he knew my name. You saw something you shouldn't have, I begged. I swear I begged like I had never begged in my life. I told him about my daughter who depended on me. I promised I hadn't seen anything, that I wouldn't tell anyone. He just smiled, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I believe you, he said with a calmness that chilled my blood. But you understand, it's not personal, it's just business. He gestured to the 2 men holding me. Take her to the foothills. Give her the special treatment. The special treatment, I found out hours later, was to be buried alive with only a PVC pipe to breathe through. They put me in the trunk of a car, gagged, with my hands and feet tied. The journey seemed to last an eternity. When we finally stopped, I was completely disoriented. I could smell damp earth, hear the croaking of frogs. We were somewhere isolated in the Appalachian foothills. One of the men opened the trunk and pulled me out. Then I saw it, in the faint light of the car's headlights. A makeshift coffin made of wooden planks. Beside it, a hole already dug, and sticking out of the coffin's lid, a small white PVC pipe. In that moment, something inside me broke. It's one thing to think you're going to die from a bullet to the head. Quick, you know? It's another thing entirely to realize they're going to let you die slowly, alone, in the dark. I started to struggle, to try to scream through the gag. One of the men slapped me so hard I saw stars. "Quiet," he growled. "Be grateful the boss is being nice. It could be worse." They threw me into the coffin as if I were a sack of potatoes. They took off the gag. They didn't need it anymore. No one would hear my screams there, but they left the ropes on my wrists and ankles. The last thing I saw before they closed the lid was the stars in the sky, bright and indifferent, then only darkness and the sound, that terrible sound of the first shovelfuls of dirt hitting the wood above me, the sound of my own grave being filled while I was still breathing. The Ohio of the 1982nd wasn't like it is today, no. Things were already tough, but you could still get by. The drug trade was starting to gain a foothold in the communities, taking over everything. Every day a new boss, a new crew popped up. People you saw grow up turned into thugs overnight. Boys who played with my daughter in the street suddenly appeared with a pistol in their waistband. That's how it was. You pretended not to see, you kept your head down, and you moved on. Living in Havenwood back then was like walking a tightrope. On one side, the police who would come in firing, not caring who was a worker and who was a criminal. On the other, the gangs with their own laws, their own punishments. We, the working people, were stuck in the middle of this crossfire, praying not to get caught by either side. I lived in a simple shack, just 2 rooms, but clean, tidy. I was proud of my home, you know? I'd sew some colorful curtains, make some cushions with scraps from the factory. I tried to make it feel like a home, even with so little. I worked as a seamstress in a factory in Portsmouth. It wasn't far, but the commute was hell. I woke up every single day at 4:30 the morning, while it was still dark. I'd pack a simple lunch, rice, beans, a fried egg when I had one. I'd leave the coffee ready for Sarah, my daughter, who was still asleep when I left. She was 13. She went to school by herself. There was no other way. Life doesn't go easy on a single woman with a child to raise. I'd leave the house while it was still night, walking down the hill carefully. Sometimes I had to step over bodies on the way, victims of the never-ending war. I'd take the first crowded bus, then the second, then the third. I'd arrive at the factory at 7 a.m., sharp, not a minute late. The boss didn't forgive lateness. He'd dock it from our pay, which was already a pittance. I'd spend the day hunched over a sewing machine, stitching fabric after fabric, until my eyes burned and my back screamed in pain. I'd only get home in the evening, exhausted, but I still had to make dinner, do laundry, help Sarah with her homework. It was a hard life, but an honest one, a life I had built with a lot of sacrifice after Michael, my husband, died. A stupid accident at the construction site where he worked. Scaffolding collapsed, they said. There were no safety measures. Of course. The boss disappeared, didn't even pay for a proper funeral. I was left alone with an 1-year-old girl, not knowing what to do, but I held my head high and carried on. I was already a seamstress. I learned from my mother as a girl. I got the job at the factory, and that's how we lived, Sarah and I. It wasn't easy, but we had enough to not go hungry, for her to go to school with her notebook under her arm. I always told her, "Study, my daughter, so you don't have to break your back over a sewing machine like your mother." I knew everyone in the neighborhood. I was respected because I didn't stick my nose where it didn't belong. I minded my own business. People called me Mrs. Abigail, the seamstress, because besides my job at the factory, I also did some mending, hemmed pants for the neighbors to make extra money. Even the boys from the gang respected me. Sometimes they'd come with a torn shirt, a ripped sneaker. I'd fix it, charge a little. It was a way to keep the peace, you know? To show I wasn't an enemy, but I wasn't a doormat either. Joseph Riley, who everyone knew as Blade Joe, was the leader of the main crew. A thin man, medium height, always wearing a baseball cap and a gold chain. He had an ugly scar that ran from his ear almost to the middle of his throat, the result of an attempt to slit his throat when he was still low level. He survived, killed his attacker and his entire family, they said. That's how he earned respect and climbed the ladder. The story of the nickname, Blade, was known by everyone, though no one spoke of it openly. They said a guy owed him drug money and tried to skip out. Joe tied the man to a chair and took out a pocket knife. He stabbed the debtor 23 times, they counted later, without hitting any vital organs. 23 small, precise cuts that made the man scream in pain but didn't kill him. Each cut is a day you're late on payment, he explained calmly. After that, no one was ever late again, and the nickname stuck. Blade Joe, the man who turned debt into methodical torture. I avoided looking directly at him when I passed him in the alleys of the neighborhood. I'd lower my head, go on my way, but I knew he knew me, just like he knew every resident. Once, when Sarah had a high fever and there was no clinic open, he was the one who sent one of his boys to drive me to a private doctor in Riverside. He didn't charge anything in return. A gift from the boss, the young man said. I thanked him, of course, but it sent a chill down my spine. Favors from drug dealers always have a price, even if it's not collected right away. On that day, the day that changed everything, I had stayed late at the factory. We had a large order for school uniforms for the city district. The boss promised overtime pay, and I couldn't refuse the money. I left around 8 p.m., already dark. I sent a message with a neighbor for Sarah not to worry, that I'd be home late. The route I always took went down Route 52, but that night there was a police operation. Patrol cars blocked the street, armed officers everywhere. I had to take a detour, a narrow street that went around the back of a set of abandoned buildings. I didn't like that route. It was poorly lit, full of trash, a perfect place for a mugging. But it was either that or wait for the operation to end, which could take all night. I walked quickly, clutching my purse strap, my eyes alert for any movement. That's when I heard voices coming from a side alley. It was none of my business. The number one rule of living in the community is you don't get involved in what's not your concern. But something in the tone of the voices made me stop. A man was pleading, crying. For the love of God, I have a family, he said, his voice choked with fear. I have 2 small children. I heard a low laugh, almost a growl. Slowly, I peered into the alley. In the gloom, lit only by the faint light of a distant streetlight, were 4 men, 3 standing, 1 kneeling. I immediately recognized Blade Joe, with that characteristic way of tilting his head to the side when talking to someone he considered inferior. He was holding something in his hand, a long, thin object that reflected the dim light. His blade. Did you really think you could do business with the Southsiders behind my back, Billy? Joe said, in a voice so calm it was even more terrifying. In my territory, eating from my hand, and betraying me. The kneeling man, Billy, was trembling so much he looked like he was about to fall apart. It was just once, Joe. I swear, I needed the money. My son is sick. Blade Joe made a hushing gesture, like a teacher asking for order in a classroom. Shh. Don't make your situation worse by lying. You think I don't know everything that happens in my territory? He crouched down, squatting in front of the man. With the tip of his blade, he lifted the man's chin, forcing him to look into his eyes. You know why I'm going to kill you, Billy? It's not for the betrayal, it's for the stupidity. Only a fool betrays the one who feeds his family. In a quick, almost casual movement, Joe plunged the blade into the man's neck. It wasn't a strong, violent blow. It was slow, methodical. The blade went in slowly, as if cutting through butter. The man's eyes went wide. A gurgling sound escaped his throat. Dark blood ran in the dim light, forming a pool at his feet. I was frozen. My legs wouldn't respond. The breath was caught in my chest. I watched the man fall to his side, his body twitching for a few seconds before becoming still. That's when I made the mistake that would change, and almost end, my life. I took a step back, trying to get away from that scene, and my foot crushed a piece of glass on the ground. The crack, though small, sounded like thunder in that silent alley. 4 pairs of eyes turned in my direction. For an instant, no one moved. Our eyes met, me and Blade Joe. I saw the recognition in his eyes, followed by something worse. A decision being made. Get her. That's all he said. It's incredible how a single moment, a single mistake, can shatter a life forever. For Abigail, this was the end of the world she knew, and the beginning of a nightmare. Stay with us to see how she confronts the unimaginable. The 2 men beside him moved immediately. I ran. I ran like I had never run in my life. My heart was beating so hard it felt like it would explode from my chest. I knew those streets, those alleys, well, but fear disoriented me. I turned one corner, then another. I could hear footsteps behind me, getting closer and closer. I tried to scream for help, but who would help? Who would go against Blade Joe? 2 blocks later, I felt a strong arm grab me from behind. A large, sweaty hand covered my mouth as I was dragged back. I tried to struggle, but it was like fighting against a wall. Stay still, a hoarse voice whispered in my ear. Or it'll be worse for you. They took me back to the alley. The man's body was still there, his eyes open, staring at nothing, a pool of blood spreading on the dirt ground. Blade Joe was leaning against the wall, calmly smoking a cigarette, as if he were just waiting for the bus. When he saw me, he threw the cigarette on the ground and stubbed it out with the tip of his shoe. Mrs. Abigail, the seamstress, he said, approaching. It wasn't a question. He knew exactly who I was. You saw something you shouldn't have. I didn't see anything. I babbled, the words tumbling over each other. I swear to God I didn't see anything. I was just passing by. I didn't even look properly. He smiled, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. To this day, I see those eyes in my nightmares, cold, calculating, the eyes of someone who had taken many lives and felt nothing. I know you're an upright woman, he said in an almost fatherly tone. Hardworking, raising the girl on your own. What's her name again? Sarah, right? I froze hearing my daughter's name from his mouth. Pretty girl, turning into a young lady already. Please, I begged, tears streaming down my face. She's all I have in the world. She needs me. I swear I didn't see anything. I won't tell anyone. Blade Joe watched me for a long moment, as if he were actually considering letting me go. Then he turned to the 2 men holding me. I believe you, he said with a terrifying calmness. But you understand, it's not personal. It's just business. I can't take the risk. He nodded his head. Take her to the foothills. Give her the special treatment. And the girl? One of the men asked. Joe shrugged. Sherry's been wanting a helper at her apartment. Take the girl there later. Sherry was his girlfriend, a beautiful woman, always well-dressed, who lived in an apartment in Riverside. The thought of my daughter in the hands of those people gave me a courage I didn't know I had. I started struggling with all my might. I managed to bite the hand covering my mouth. The man roared in pain and slapped me so hard I saw stars. Calm down, Joe said without raising his voice. Don't damage the goods. He looked at me, his head tilted to the side like a curious bird. You should feel honored. Normally, we just put a bullet in the head and dump them in the river. But you're known in the neighborhood, respected. You deserve special treatment. Special treatment. That's what he called the fate he had in store for me, as if it were a favor, a consideration. When I realized what special treatment meant, hours later, I understood it was just another form of cruelty, a slow, agonizing, lonely death. A living burial. They gagged and blindfolded me. They tied my wrists and ankles with a rough rope that cut into my skin. They threw me in the trunk of a car as if I were a package, not a human being. The ride seemed to last an eternity. The car bumped along potholed roads, each jolt sending waves of pain through my body, already bruised from the slap and the fall. The air in the trunk was stuffy, almost unbreathable. I thought I would pass out several times, When we finally stopped, I had no idea where we were. It could have been anywhere in the foothills, Adams County, maybe further. I felt the trunk open. Rough hands pulled me out. Even with the blindfold on, I could tell we were in an isolated place. The air was different, cleaner. I could hear frogs croaking, crickets chirping, the sound of leaves rustling in the wind. No city sounds. No human voices other than my captors. They ripped the blindfold from my eyes. I blinked several times, trying to get used to the brightness of the car's headlights. That's when I saw it. A hole dug in the ground. Beside it, a makeshift coffin made of old planks. It looked more like a large crate than a proper coffin. On the lid, a small white PVC pipe, about 2 inches in diameter, jutted upwards. I looked around desperately. We were in a clearing in the middle of the woods. Tall trees surrounded us on all sides. The sky above was dotted with stars. A clear, beautiful night that contrasted grotesquely with the horror I was living. "Please," I tried to say through the gag, the words coming out muffled, incomprehensible. One of the men, the same one who had hit me, laughed and pulled the cloth from my mouth. "Want to say your last words? Take your chance while the boss isn't here to tell us to get it over with." "My daughter," I managed to say, my throat dry with fear. "She has no one else. Please, don't do this." The other, older man lit a cigarette and shrugged. "It's nothing personal, ma'am. Boss's orders. And your daughter will be fine. Sherry likes hard-working girls." "Then just kill me now," I begged. "A bullet. Don't let me suffer like this." The first man approached, a cruel smile on his lips. "That's the thing. The boss wants you to suffer a little. Said people who see what they shouldn't die slowly." He pointed to the PVC pipe. "But he's a nice guy. He's giving you a straw to breathe through. You'll last a few days like this. Time to think about your mistake." It was then that I fully understood the horror that awaited me. It wouldn't be a quick death. It would be slow, in the dark, alone. I began to struggle again, trying to break free, trying to run, even knowing it was useless. The 2 men grabbed me, laughing at my desperate fight. "Stop the show," the older one said, giving me a shove. "It'll be worse if we have to knock you out first." They carried me to the open coffin and threw me inside. The space was so tight, I could barely move. I smelled damp wood, fresh earth. The coffin had been placed partially in the hole. The foot end was already covered in dirt. "Any last requests?" the smiling one asked as he picked up the coffin lid. "Tell my daughter I love her," I said, tears streaming down my face. "Please." "Sure thing, ma'am," he replied, but from the tone of his voice, I knew it was a lie. My daughter would never know what had truly happened to me. To her, I would have simply disappeared, like so many others in Ohio at that time. They placed the lid over the coffin. The darkness was immediate and complete, except for a small point of light coming from the PVC pipe. I heard the sound of hammers nailing the lid shut. Thump, thump, thump. Each blow was like a nail in my own body, then the most terrible sound. Dirt being thrown onto the wood above me, shovelful after shovelful, feeling the weight increase, the pressure build. At some point, the sound stopped. I heard muffled voices, the sound of a car starting, driving away, and then silence. A silence so deep, so absolute, I could hear my own heart beating, racing with panic. I was alone, buried alive, with only a thin PVC pipe between me and suffocation. What goes through your mind in a moment like that? When you realize you're not just facing death, but a slow, suffocating end? For most, this would be the final chapter, but for Abigail, it was the start of a war for survival. Tell me in the comments. I want to know if you would have acted like I did, because in those first minutes, I did nothing, absolutely nothing. I was paralyzed by shock, by disbelief. A part of my brain refused to accept that this was really happening, that I, Abigail Miller, seamstress, Sarah's mother, was trapped in a coffin under the earth, condemned to a slow death by starvation and thirst. It was only when the air started to feel heavy, when I felt the first pang of oxygen deprivation, that the panic truly hit me. I started to scream, to struggle against the ropes that bound my wrists and ankles. I pounded on the coffin lid with my tied fists, ignoring the pain as the ropes cut deeper into my skin. I screamed until my voice failed, until my throat burned like I had swallowed fire. And then came the cold, clear understanding. No one was going to hear me. No one was coming to save me. If I wanted to get out of there alive, it would have to be by my own strength. And even that seemed impossible. How do you escape from a buried coffin? How do you survive without water? Without food? Breathe, I told myself. Breathe and think. Where there's life, there's hope. Isn't that what they say? The first step was to get rid of the ropes. I started rubbing my tied wrists against a nail I felt protruding from the side of the coffin. It hurt, but the pain was good. It meant I was still alive, still fighting. I don't know how long it took until I managed to free my hands. Minutes, hours, in complete darkness, with no reference points, time lost all meaning. When I finally felt the ropes give way, I almost cried with relief. With my hands free, I was able to untie my ankles. The next step was to try to get out. I pushed against the coffin lid with all my strength. Nothing. The weight of the earth was too great. I tried again, using my feet for leverage, pushing until I felt the muscles in my arms burn with the effort. The lid didn't move a single millimeter. It was in that moment that the true extent of my situation hit me. There was no way out, not in the conventional sense. I was truly trapped in there, with only that small PVC pipe as a connection to the outside world. The pipe that gave me air, but was too narrow to scream for help through, too narrow to be an escape route. I touched the pipe with my fingers, felt something inside it, a dead ant maybe, or a piece of dirt that had fallen in. Carefully, I cleared the obstruction. The airflow improved slightly. It was little, very little, but in that situation, any improvement was a miracle. The next few hours, or were they days, were a nightmare of darkness, pain, and fear. Every minute felt like an eternity. I tried to stay calm, to breathe slowly to conserve oxygen. I thought of Sarah. I imagined that somehow she would know I hadn't abandoned her voluntarily, that I had fought until the very last moment to get back to her. Thirst was the first real torture to manifest. My tongue felt swollen, my lips were cracked. Each breath through the pipe brought dry air that burned my throat, already raw from screaming. I tried not to think about water, but it was impossible. The human mind is cruel. The more you try not to think about something, the more obsessively you think about it. The cramped space of the coffin soon became another torment. I couldn't stretch my legs completely, couldn't turn over properly. Every movement was limited, painful. My muscles started to ache from the confinement, from the forced position. I tried to shift positions from time to time, but there was nowhere to go. And there were the sounds, or rather, the lack of them. The silence was so absolute that I started to hear things that weren't their voices calling my name, my daughter's cries, the sound of footsteps above me. It was my mind playing tricks, trying to fill the acoustic void with something, anything. No light, no time reference. My sleep cycle became completely disrupted. I slept in short naps. I'd wake up disoriented, not knowing if minutes or hours had passed. Dreams and reality started to blur. I dreamed I was at home making breakfast for Sarah, only to wake up in the suffocating darkness of the coffin. It was during one of those moments of semi-consciousness that I felt something move across my hand. An insect, probably a roach or a beetle that had come in through the PVC pipe. My first instinct was disgust, to flick my hand to get it off. But then, a strange, almost alien thought entered my mind. Protein. Food. I won't lie and say I didn't hesitate. I did. The idea of eating raw insects was revolting, but hunger was already starting to gnaw at my stomach like a wild animal. And a cold voice inside my head said, "It's this or die." A simple choice when put like that. I caught the insect. It was a large beetle, from what I could feel with my fingers. I closed my eyes, even in the darkness, and put it in my mouth. The shell was hard, difficult to crack with my teeth. The taste was bitter, alien. My stomach immediately revolted, and I threw up. The limited space meant the scarce vomit I didn't have much in my stomach to expel spread across my face and chest. The smell in the enclosed space was nauseating, but hunger gave me no choice. The next time I felt an insect, this time something smaller, maybe a young roach, I didn't hesitate. I crushed it between my teeth quickly, swallowing before the taste could really register. It wasn't much, but it was something. It was life. The thirst, however, was relentless, much worse than the hunger. My lips were already bleeding from being so cracked. My tongue felt like a piece of old leather in my mouth. That's when I touched the brooch I wore on my dress, a small metal hummingbird that had been a gift from my mother. The pin was sharp, used to fasten the brooch to my clothes. A terrible idea began to form in my mind, an idea born of absolute desperation. I had heard stories of castaways who, without fresh water, drank their own blood to survive. I had always thought they were exaggerations, stories to impress. But there, in that darkness, with thirst driving me slowly mad, the idea no longer seemed so absurd. I held the brooch with trembling fingers. The sharp pin gleamed faintly in the gloom. There was a faint, almost imperceptible light coming from the PVC pipe. I took a deep breath, said a quick prayer. My God, forgive me for what I'm about to do. Give me strength. I pressed the tip of the brooch to my left forearm. I hesitated for a moment, then pressed down. The pain was sharp, but almost welcome after so many hours of numbness. The blood welled up, slow at first, then forming a small pool I could feel with my fingers. I brought my arm to my mouth, my lips touching the open wound. The taste was metallic, warm, strange. My stomach churned again, but this time I forced myself not to vomit. I couldn't waste the precious liquid. I swallowed, feeling the blood go down my parched throat. It wasn't water, far from it, but the moisture brought a momentary relief to the excruciating thirst. A mother's will to see her child again is one of the most powerful forces on earth. Abigail just proved she would cross any line to survive. But this was only the first of many impossible choices she would be forced to make. That's how I began my macabre survival routine. Every few hours, impossible to know exactly how long, but when the thirst became unbearable, I would make a small cut and drink the blood that welled up. Not much, just enough to moisten my throat, to maintain sanity for a few more hours. The cuts were small, superficial. I knew I couldn't afford to lose too much blood. Insects remained my only source of food. I caught anything that moved in the dark: beetles, roaches, even small scorpions that somehow found their way into my coffin. The initial disgust gave way to necessity. It was eat or die, an easy choice in the end. Time passed, impossible to measure. I tried to count my heartbeats to get some sense of it, but I would soon lose count, my mind wandering, slipping into dark places. I started counting sleep periods as nights, even though I knew I might be sleeping several times in a single real day. I made small marks on the coffin's wood with the tip of the brooch, one for each day that passed. That's how I reached the count of 9 days. 9 marks on the wood, 9 cycles of despair, thirst, hunger, small cuts, insects devoured blindly, 9 eternities of darkness and loneliness. On what I counted as the 9th day, I was already delirious. Advanced dehydration, hunger, lack of proper sleep, all of it was taking its toll. I talked to people who weren't there. My mother, dead for years. Michael, my husband. Sarah, my daughter. I told stories to the dark, sang lullabies in a voice that was no more than a hoarse whisper. I was dying, I knew it. I could feel life slowly slipping away, like sand in an hourglass. I no longer had the strength to make new cuts, to hunt for insects. I just breathed, more and more shallowly, waiting for sleep to finally turn into something more permanent. That's when I heard a different sound. It wasn't part of my delusions, not a trick of my starving mind. It was real. Footsteps. Someone was walking above me, treading on the earth that covered my coffin. On what I counted as the 9th day, I was mostly delirious, but a sound from above cut through the haze. Footsteps. Heavy, slow. Not the hurried steps of my captors. A flicker of something I thought was long dead hope ignited in my chest. I gathered every last shred of life force I had left. Not for a scream, but for a sound. I remembered the children in the neighborhood playing, tapping rhythms on drain pipes. With a shaking finger, I began to tap on the PVC pipe. Tap, 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 the universal signal of distress. SOS. It was faint, pathetic, but it was deliberate. It was my last act of defiance against the silence. I stopped, listening, my heart hammering against my ribs. The footsteps paused. I tapped again, pouring my entire will to live into those small impacts. Please, hear me. I am here. I am alive. 9 days, 9 eternities in complete darkness. The concept of time had completely vanished after the first few hours. Without light, without reference points, every minute dragged on as if it were an hour. At first I tried to count, to mark the seconds in my head, but I soon realized it was useless. The human mind isn't made to function like that, in an absolute void. The first 2 days were the worst, in a way. The panic was constant, suffocating. I tried to scream through the pipe, to beg for help, even knowing we were in the middle of nowhere, that no one would pass by. My voice, already weak from thirst, echoed back at me, as if even the sound was trapped in that coffin with me. The thirst, my God, the thirst. Anyone who has never experienced true thirst has no idea what that torment is. It starts as a discomfort in the throat, then becomes a burning sensation as if you've swallowed live coals. Your tongue swells, your lips crack. Every breath of dry air coming through the PVC pipe was like sandpaper on my throat. By the second day, I could barely swallow. My saliva had completely dried up, leaving a bitter, metallic taste in my mouth. It was in this desperation for water that I began to examine what I had with me in that coffin. The simple dress I was wearing, already soaked with sweat in the first few days, then strangely dry as dehydration progressed. The worn-out shoes that were useless to me there. And the brooch. My hummingbird brooch. It was a simple piece, of no value to anyone but me. My mother had given it to me when I was 15. The hummingbird is small, but brave, she used to say. Just like you, my daughter. The brooch was made of a cheap metal, already a bit tarnished, but the bird's beak was pointed, sharp, used to fasten the brooch to clothing. I remembered an article I had read years before in one of those old magazines that circulated in the neighborhood. It was about castaways lost at sea, without fresh water. It said that in total desperation, some drank their own blood to survive for a few more hours until rescue arrived. At the time, I thought the story was absurd, even disgusting. But there in the dark, with thirst slowly driving me mad, it no longer seemed so absurd. The decision was not easy. A part of me screamed that it was madness, that it would only make things worse, that it would hasten my death. Another part, colder, more calculating, said that I was already dying anyway, that without water I wouldn't last much longer, that any chance, however small, was better than none. I held the brooch with fingers that were already trembling from weakness. I pulled up my dress, exposing the skin of my forearm. Even in total darkness, I could feel the texture of my own skin, already dry from dehydration. I took a deep breath, prayed for God's forgiveness for what I was about to do, and pressed the tip of the brooch to my skin. The first cut was hesitant, too shallow. I barely felt the blood well up. I pressed deeper, ignoring the sharp pain that radiated through my arm. This time, I felt the warm liquid run down my skin. With my other hand, I guided my arm to my mouth, my lips finding the wound in the dark. The taste, there's no way to describe that taste without having been through it. Metallic, yes, as they say, but also warm, thick, with a strange and revolting sweetness. My stomach immediately turned. I vomited. The little I had in my stomach, basically bile, spread over my chest, over the coffin. The smell in the enclosed space was nauseating, but thirst was stronger than disgust. On the second attempt, I managed to keep the blood in my mouth, to let it run down my parched throat. It was far from water, but the moisture, any moisture, brought a momentary relief to the excruciating thirst. Thus, I established a macabre routine to survive. Every period I imagined to be a day, based on the moments when exhaustion overcame me and I slept briefly. I would make a small cut on my arm and drink the blood that trickled out. The cuts were calculated, shallow enough not to cause dangerous blood loss, deep enough to extract the precious liquid. Hunger was also a constant torture, but different from thirst. Thirst is sharp, immediate, maddening. Hunger starts as a discomfort, then turns into a dull, constant ache, which over time gives way to a strange kind of numbness. The body begins to consume its own reserves. Muscles waste away, fat disappears. My salvation, as absurd as it sounds, was the insects. The coffin wasn't completely sealed. Besides the PVC pipe, there were small gaps between the ill-fitting planks. Through these gaps, small visitors entered. Beetles, roaches, even small scorpions. At first, the disgust was so great that I tried to push them away. Then hunger spoke louder. I learned to hunt in the dark, guided only by the sound of tiny legs moving, by the slight displacement of air when something approached my skin. The first insect I ate, a large beetle from what I could feel with my fingers, was a terrible experience. The shell crunched between my teeth. The bitter taste exploded in my mouth, but I swallowed it anyway, fighting the urge to vomit. After the third or fourth, it wasn't so hard anymore. The human body adapts to extreme situations in ways we never imagined possible. Around what I calculated to be the fifth day, the hallucinations began. At first, they were small sensory distortions, sounds that weren't there. Sensations of movement when I was completely still. Then visions. Even in total darkness, I started to see things, colors dancing in the void, shapes materializing out of nothing. The auditory hallucinations were the most vivid. I heard voices clearly, entire conversations. My mother's voice singing lullabies from my childhood. My husband Michael talking about the plans we had for the future before he died. And Sarah, especially Sarah. "Mom, where are you? Why did you leave me?" Her voice so real, so close, I could swear she was there with me in the dark. "I didn't leave you, my child," I would answer. My voice no more than a hoarse whisper. "I'm trying to come back to you. I'm fighting." These imaginary dialogues with my daughter were both a torment and a comfort. On one hand, they tore my heart apart, reminding me of what I had lost, of what I would never see again. On the other, they gave me the will to keep fighting, to not give up completely. The weakness grew with each passing day. The small cuts I made to draw blood became harder and harder to perform. My hands trembled, my fingers wouldn't obey properly. My muscles, already weak from hunger and the forced position in the cramped coffin, began to have painful spasms. I had frequent blackouts, moments of darkness within the darkness, if that makes any sense. At some point, impossible to say when, I began to accept that I was dying. It wouldn't be a quick death like a bullet to the head, which was what I had begged from Blade Joe's men. It would be slow, agonizing, each body function failing bit by bit, system by system. First, the mind, with the hallucinations, the confusion. Then the muscles, with the extreme weakness. Lastly, the vital organs, the heart slowing down, the lungs struggling to capture the little oxygen that came through the PVC pipe. It's strange how accepting death brings a kind of peace. I stopped fighting so hard, stopped despairing. I began to use the little energy I had left to pray, to mentally say goodbye to my daughter, to make peace with the idea that my body would never be found, that Sarah would never know what really happened to me. On what I calculated to be the 9th day, 9 marks made with the brooch on the coffin's wood, I was more dead than alive. The dehydration was so advanced that I could no longer make cuts to drink blood. I didn't even have the energy to hunt the insects that still occasionally appeared. I just breathed, more and more shallowly, hoping that the sleep that was coming would finally turn into something permanent. It was then that I heard a different sound, one that was not part of my usual hallucinations. Footsteps. Someone was walking above me, stepping on the earth that covered my coffin, twigs snapping under their feet. My first thought was that Blade Joe's men had come back. Maybe to check if I was dead yet. Maybe to finish the job once and for all. But something told me it wasn't them. The pace was different, heavier, slower, like someone who isn't in a hurry, who is just exploring the area. I gathered the little strength I had left and tried to scream. The sound that came out wasn't a scream, but a hoarse croak, almost inaudible even to myself. I tried again, directing the sound toward the PVC pipe, my only connection to the outside world. The footsteps stopped. For a terrible moment, I thought the person had left, that they hadn't heard me. Then, the footsteps started again, faster now, approaching. I heard the sound of something hitting the ground, a shovel maybe, and then the voice. A real human voice, not a hallucination. Is someone there? The voice was a deep, male voice. I hear something here. I tried to scream, but the sound barely came out. Help me. Please. I heard a gasp of surprise. Sweet Lord, there's someone buried here. More sounds of movement, and then the unmistakable noise of earth being removed. A shovel digging into the soil, throwing dirt to the side. Hang on, the voice shouted. I'm getting you out of there. I don't know how long it took. Minutes? Hours? In my weakened state, any wait seemed like an eternity. I could hear the rhythmic sound of the shovel digging, tossing dirt aside. Every now and then, the voice would say something, ask if I was still conscious, tell me to hang on. Then, finally, I felt the weight on the coffin lessen. The lid was exposed. I heard the sound of something metallic, a crowbar I later found out, being inserted between the planks, a creak of wood, nails giving way, and then light. Light so bright it felt like it was burning my eyes, accustomed to 9 days of total darkness. The coffin lid was removed, and I saw for the first time the face of my savior, a middle-aged man, his face sun-weathered, unshaven, his eyes wide with shock as he saw me. Samuel, that was his name, though I only found out later. A farmer who had gone to gather firewood in that remote area. Dear God, he murmured, making the sign of the cross when he saw me. No wonder. I must have looked like a corpse. Skin yellowed by dehydration, eyes sunken in their sockets, lips cracked and bleeding, arms covered in small cuts, some infected. My dress was filthy with sweat, vomit, blood. Water? I managed to whisper, please. He quickly took a canteen from his belt and carefully brought it to my mouth. The first sip was the most incredible sensation I have ever experienced in my life. The cool water going down my parched throat, bringing life back to a body that was already surrendering to death. I drank in small sips, as he instructed. Drinking too much at once after such dehydration could kill me, he explained. With a gentleness I didn't expect from such calloused hands, Samuel lifted me out of the coffin, carrying me as if I were a child. I weighed almost nothing after 9 days without proper food. My muscles barely responded. My legs were numb from being in the forced position for so long. Who did this to you, ma'am? He asked, as he carried me out of that hole that had almost been my final tomb. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Blade Joe's name was stuck in my throat. The fear was still too great. If he found out I had survived, he would come after me again, and next time he wouldn't leave any chance of survival. Samuel didn't insist. He took me to his cart. He didn't have a car. He lived off a small farm nearby. He laid me in the back, covering me with an old but clean blanket. He offered more water, a few pieces of brown sugar candy he had brought for a snack. I'm taking you to the hospital, he said, getting on the cart and taking the reins of the old horse that pulled it. No, I managed to say, panic giving me strength I didn't know I still had. Hospital, no. They'll find me. He looked at me for a long time, his brow furrowed with concern. I didn't need to explain who they were. In the Ohio of that era, everyone knew that certain people had eyes and ears everywhere, that hospitals were the first places they looked for someone they wanted to find. I know a lady, he said finally. A healer, Mama Alara. She can take care of you until you're better, she's trustworthy. I nodded weakly, too weak to say more. The cart started to move, each jolt sending waves of pain through my battered body. But it was a good pain, in a way. The pain of being alive, of having survived the impossible. She survived the grave, but what comes out of a place like that is never the same as what went in. Her body was free, but her mind was now consumed by a single, burning thought. And it wasn't about forgiveness. I wasn't thinking of revenge, not then. There was only one thought in my head, one name, Sarah. What had happened to her? What had they done to her? The rage began to smolder from that very fear, colder and sharper than any blade. The journey to Mama Elara's house is a blur in my memory. I remember disconnected moments. The rural landscape passing slowly, the warmth of the sun on skin that hadn't seen light in 9 days, the surreal feeling of being outdoors after being confined for so long. Mama Elara was a black woman of an indeterminable age. She could have been 50 or 80, impossible to say. Small, thin, with gnarled but surprisingly strong hands. She lived in a simple house on the outskirts of Adams County, surrounded by a yard full of medicinal herbs she grew herself. When Samuel carried me into her house, she didn't ask questions. She just looked at my condition, clicked her tongue in disapproval, and started preparing her remedies. "Put her in the back bed," she instructed. "I'll make a tea to start cleaning out her system." The days that followed were a slow, painful recovery. Mama Elara treated my wounds, the cuts on my arms, already infected, the bed sores that had formed on my back and legs from the forced position in the coffin, my cracked lips from dehydration. She used a mix of traditional medicine she had learned from her mother and grandmother, and modern knowledge she had acquired from books and courses over the years. "You were lucky," she told me on the 3rd day as she changed the dressings on my arms. "One more day in that place, and there would have been no saving you, not even with prayers. The infection was already getting into your blood. You would have lost your arms, at the very least." Slowly, I regained my strength. First, I was able to sit up in bed, then stand with help, and finally take a few steps. The human body has an incredible capacity to recover, as long as it has time and proper care. It was during this recovery period that I learned what was happening in the outside world. Samuel, who came to visit me from time to time, brought the news. I was being sought after, not by the police, not officially, but strange men had been seen asking questions in downtown Adams County, showing a photo of me. "They think you ran away," Samuel explained. "They don't know I found you. They think you somehow managed to escape." That explained the search. Blade Joe couldn't leave a living witness walking around. He had to find me, finish the job. "And my daughter?" I asked, my heart tight with worry. "Do you know anything about her?" Samuel shook his head sadly. "Only what I've heard is that a girl who lived alone in Havenwood was taken to the house of some woman named Sherry in Riverside. They say she's the girlfriend of a big shot from the neighborhood." It was exactly what I feared. Sarah in the hands of those people. Not as a hostage. They didn't need hostages. They thought I was dead or had fled far away. But as a servant, maybe worse. Sherry had a reputation for treating her maids badly. Young girls she took from the communities to work in near-slavery conditions. It was then that the idea began to form in my mind. A crazy idea, suicidal even. To go back. To go back to the place where they had tried to kill me. To go back near the people who were still looking for me. But not as Abigail Miller, the seamstress who saw what she shouldn't have. As someone else, unrecognizable, invisible to their eyes. "Mama Elara," I said one evening, as she was teaching me how to prepare a salve for the scars that were already beginning to form on my arms. "I need your help with something." She looked at me with those wise eyes that seemed to see beyond words, straight into the soul. "Revenge is not a good medicine, child. It only poisons the one who takes it." I hadn't said anything about revenge, but she knew. Of course she knew. Mama Elara had that gift of reading people, of understanding what was left unsaid. "It's not just revenge," I replied, though I knew that was a lie. "It's justice. And my daughter. I need to get her out of there." Mama Elara simply nodded and handed me a warm cup of chamomile tea. "Justice is a heavy stone to carry, child, especially when you carry it alone." That night, I couldn't sleep. The horrors of the coffin returned, but they were mixed with a new kind of agony, helplessness. I had survived, but what for? To live in hiding forever, knowing my daughter was a slave to the man who tried to murder me? I started sobbing, not loud cries, but the silent, body-racking sobs of someone who has reached their absolute limit. Mama Elara entered my room as if she had been waiting. She didn't say a word, just sat on the edge of the bed. I prayed to God for 9 days in that box. I whispered into the darkness. I prayed for a miracle. He sent Samuel, but he let them take my daughter. He let them win. What kind of justice is that? She took my hand. Her skin was wrinkled, but her grip was firm. God gives you the ingredients, child. He doesn't bake the bread for you. He gave you survival. He gave you a second chance. What you choose to bake with it, that is your own prayer. A prayer of action. Her words didn't offer easy comfort. They offered something more important. A path. My rage was not a sin to be suppressed. It was an ingredient. My pain was the fire. And my love for Sarah was the reason to bake the bread. The next morning, I came to her with eyes clear of tears, filled only with resolve. "Teach me," I said. "Teach me about the ingredients." And just like that, the victim was gone, and an avenger began to take her place. This is the turning point where the seamstress becomes a strategist, forging her own dark path to justice. You won't want to miss how she prepares for her return. Mama Elara sighed deeply, looking at the herbs drying in bunches, hanging from the ceiling of the small kitchen. "There are herbs that heal and herbs that kill," she said finally. "Sometimes the only difference is the dose." She looked at me again, her eyes piercing. "If this is really what you want, I will teach you. But remember, poison doesn't choose who it kills. It can end up killing the one who prepares it too." I'm sure many of you are thinking, how could a simple seamstress learn such things so quickly? But when your mind has only one single goal, when every breath you take is part of the plan, you become a frighteningly dedicated student. Every name, every dose, I carved them into my heart. And believe me, what comes next is even harder to believe. Let's see if you have the stomach to witness my revenge. Because what happened next was something I never imagined I would be capable of doing. The woman who came out of that coffin was not the same one who went in. Something had died down there in the darkness. Innocence, perhaps. The belief that the world has natural justice, and something new had been born. A cold, calculating, patient determination. The determination of someone who has seen death up close and has nothing left to lose. In the following 3 months, under Mama Elara's care, I not only recovered my physical health, but I was transformed. I learned about herbs, the ones that heal and the ones that kill. I learned about disguises, about how to change my appearance, my voice, my walk. I learned to be invisible, to become part of the scenery, someone no one notices or remembers. And I planned every detail of my return, my new identity, and what would come next. A plan that would take 5 years to fully execute. A plan that would start with a simple woman selling hot plate lunches at the entrance of Havenwood and end with the complete destruction of Blade Joe and his empire. Mama Elara's house was on a small plot of land on the outskirts of Adams County. A simple brick building with an asbestos roof and a backyard full of herbs planted in neat, well-tended beds. It was a simple place, but clean and welcoming. In the 3 months I spent there, that corner of the world became my refuge, my hiding place, my school. Mama Elara was no ordinary healer. She had knowledge that came down through generations, her mother, her grandmother, all healers. But she had also studied, taken nursing courses, read medical books. She mixed ancient wisdom with the new, prayers with science. God left the cure in the plants, she would say, but he gave man the brain to figure out how to use them. Her small, gnarled hands worked miracles. She treated my wounds with herbal salves she made herself. She gave me teas to cleanse the body from within, as she put it. She taught me exercises to recover the muscles that had atrophied during my 9 days in the coffin. "You were lucky they found you," she would repeat as she changed the dressings on my arms, where the cuts I had made to drink my own blood were infected. The infection was already getting into your blood. You would have lost your arms, at the very least. And lucky that Samuel knows me. He brought you straight here. A hospital would have asked too many questions, would have called the police. Samuel would show up from time to see how I was doing. It was he who brought the first news from the outside world. According to him, my disappearance had become the talk of the neighborhood. The official version, spread by Blade Joe's men, was that I had been the victim of a robbery on my way home from work, that my body had been found in a ditch in the foothills, unrecognizable, identified only by the work ID in my pocket. They even held a wake, Samuel told me. the indignation clear in his voice. Closed casket, of course. They said the body was too battered to be seen. That son of a bitch Blade Joe even showed up, gave his condolences to your girl, said you were a hard-working woman, that the neighborhood had lost a warrior. My blood boiled at this information, the audacity, the calculated cruelty. To stage a wake for a woman they had buried alive themselves. To use my supposed death as more propaganda for his false image, as a community protector. It was stomach-turning. But the part that cut my heart the most was hearing about Sarah. Samuel found out, through acquaintances who frequented Havenwood, that my daughter had been adopted by Sherry, Blade Joe's girlfriend. It wasn't an official adoption, of course. It was an appropriation. Sherry had taken Sarah to live in her apartment in Riverside, supposedly to take care of the girl who had lost her mother. They say the girl works there, Samuel explained, choosing his words carefully. Cleans, cooks, that sort of thing. It wasn't hard to read between the lines. My 3-year-old daughter had become a domestic servant, or worse, in the home of the girlfriend of the man who had tried to kill me. The rage I felt at that moment was unlike anything I had ever experienced before. It wasn't a hot, explosive anger. It was cold, calculating, methodical. An anger that didn't cloud my judgment but sharpened it. An anger that called not for screams or tears, but for careful planning. It was that night, after Samuel left, that I had my first serious conversation with Mama Elara about what I planned to do. We were in her small kitchen, where I was helping her prepare a calendula salve for my scars. I have to go back, I said simply. I have to get my daughter out of there. Mama Elara looked at me for a long time, those dark, deep eyes seeming to see beyond my words. And how do you plan to do that? Are you going to show up, knock on the door and say, "Hi, it's me. I'm back from the dead"? They'll kill you on the spot, and your daughter with you. Not as Abigail, I replied, as someone else. Someone they would never suspect. And after you get the girl, where will you run? They have contacts everywhere. They won't rest until they find you both. It was true, and I knew it. There was nowhere to run. Not really. Men like Blade Joe had long arms. And besides, I didn't just want to run. I wanted justice. Or revenge. The line between the two had become very thin for me. I'm not going to run, I said finally. I'm going to destroy them from the inside out, like a cancer. Mama Elara sighed deeply, shaking her head. Revenge is not a good medicine, child. It only poisons the one who takes it. It's not just revenge, I answered, though I knew it was at least partly. It's justice. They can't keep doing what they're doing. How many other mothers have they buried? How many other girls, like my daughter, are being exploited? The old healer was silent for a long moment, her eyes fixed on the herbs drying in bunches hanging from the kitchen ceiling. There are herbs that heal and herbs that kill, she said finally. Sometimes the only difference is the dose. She looked at me again. If this is really what you want, I will teach you. But remember, poison doesn't choose who it kills. It can end up killing the one who prepares it too. In the following months, I learned more than I ever thought possible. Mama Elara was a strict but patient teacher. She taught me about herbs, not just the medicinal ones she already used in my treatments, but other herbs that, in the right doses, caused specific effects. Stomach pains, kidney failure, hallucinations, paranoia, a death that looked natural. A long time ago, when there were no doctors in the countryside, it was the midwives and healers like me who took care of the people's health, she explained as she showed me how to identify the right plants, how to dry them, how to prepare the extracts. We had to know both what heals and what kills, so we'd never confuse them. At the same time, we worked on my physical transformation. First, the hair. It went from black to gray, a painful process that involved completely bleaching it and then dyeing it with a special mixture Mama Elara prepared. I cut it short, very different from the long hair I always wore. I learned to use makeup, not to beautify, but to age myself. Face powder, a few shades lighter than my skin, to give a sickly appearance. A soft brown pencil to accentuate expression lines that were already starting to appear naturally. A hunched posture, like someone carrying the weight of the world on their back. A hoarser, slower voice. Thick-rimmed glasses, non-prescription, just to change the shape of my face. When I looked in the mirror for the first time after the complete transformation, I barely recognized myself. I was no longer Abigail Miller, the 36-year-old seamstress. I was Mrs. Eleanor, a frail-looking woman in her 52nd who looked like she had lived a hard life. "Anyone who looks at you now sees an old lady," Mama Alara said, satisfied with the result. "And old ladies are invisible in this world. No one pays attention, no one suspects. It's the best camouflage." Parallel to the physical transformation, we created a new identity. Eleanor Santos, widow of a police officer killed in the line of duty. A story that would explain why I didn't want any involvement with the authorities. Coming from rural Kentucky, with no family, no verifiable past, a simple woman who just wanted to start over, to earn an honest living. The plan we devised was both simple and complex. I would return to Ohio, but not directly to Havenwood. I would first establish a small business selling hot plate lunches in the area. I would build a reputation. I would become a familiar presence before getting close to Blade Joe's territory. Slowly, patiently, I would gain the trust of the right people. And then, when I had access, I would begin the final phase of the plan. 3 months after arriving at Mama Ilara's house, I left as a completely different person, with some money she lent me. "It's an investment, not charity," she insisted. I rented a small room in the back of a house in Portsmouth. I bought a used stove, some pots, basic ingredients. I started selling hot plate lunches on the street, near a busy bus stop. It was tough at first. The competition was stiff, the profit margins small, but I had learned something important from Mama Ilara besides herbs: patience. "Time works for the patient," she always said, so I was patient. I woke up at 4 a.m., prepared the meals, sold them until noon. In the afternoon, I rested and planned for the next day. Slowly, I gained regular customers, building a reputation for simple but good food, fair prices, and impeccable hygiene. After 6 months, I had a loyal clientele. Bus drivers, fare collectors, workers from the local shops, everyone knew and liked Mrs. Eleanor's food. I started to expand, offering to deliver the lunches. First to the nearby shops, then to areas a little further away, including the entrance to Havenwood. The first time I went back to the neighborhood, my heart was beating so hard I thought I would faint. I was delivering meals to a small market at the community entrance. I looked at everything, everyone, expecting to be recognized at any moment. But nothing happened. No one looked twice at the gray-haired woman with thick glasses delivering lunches. It was, as Mama Ilara had said, old ladies are invisible. Slowly, I moved further up the hill, expanding my delivery territory. I discovered that the boys from the movement, as they called the dealers, were good customers. They had money, liked well-made food, and didn't want to stray too far from their posts for lunch. I started making regular deliveries to some of the smaller spots, always polite, always discreet. "Good morning, son. I brought your lunch. Want extra gravy today?" I avoided looking too directly into their faces, especially the older ones who might have known me before. I kept my head down, my manner submissive. I only spoke when spoken to, never meddled where I wasn't invited. The perfect example of a harmless old woman who just wanted to earn a living. That's how, gradually, over almost a year, I got closer to the area directly controlled by Blade Joe. The main spot was at an old sports court at the top of the hill. That's where he spent most of his day, running his business, receiving subordinates, counting money. And that's where I finally managed to extend my deliveries after one of the managers tried my food and liked it. "Mrs. Eleanor," he told me one day, "starting tomorrow, I want 10 meals every day for the guys at the court. Make it good, you hear? The boss will be eating too." My stomach twisted into a knot. The boss, Blade Joe, the man who had ordered my death, the man who had indirectly taken my daughter. I was finally going to face him again after more than a year, but this time, he wouldn't know who I was. This time, I would have the advantage. That night, I didn't sleep. I prepared the meals with special care. Fluffy rice, well-seasoned beans, meatloaf with onions, a side of cornbread, simple, homemade food, like what you'd eat at your mother's house. And in one of the meals, the one to be served to the boss, identifiable as the only one with a small extra container of gravy, I added something special. An extract from a plant that Mama Alara had taught me how to prepare. Nothing lethal, nothing that would cause immediate and obvious effects, just enough to cause a slight malaise, a stomach upset that he would probably attribute to anything but the food. The next day, I went up the hill with my heart in my throat, carrying the thermal container with the 10 meals. When I reached the court, I was met by one of the young men I already knew from previous deliveries. "You can leave it there on the table, ma'am. Want to get paid now, or should we settle up at the end of the week?" "Either way is fine, son," I replied, maintaining the role of an easygoing old lady. "Whatever's best for you." That's when I heard that voice. The voice that haunted my nightmares, the voice that had ordered me buried alive. Is this the food Mark was talking so much about? I turned slowly, careful not to show any reaction. There he was, Blade Joe, a little older, a little heavier, but with the same cold eyes, the same scar on his neck, the same way of tilting his head slightly to the side when he spoke. "Yes, sir," I replied, my voice deliberately weaker, submissive. "I hope you like it." He studied me for a moment, but his eyes just passed over me, without really seeing me. He didn't see Abigail in old Eleanor. He saw only an unimportant old woman, a food vendor, an insignificant detail in his day. "I have a special meal for you, sir," said the young man accompanying me, handing him the container with the extra gravy. Mrs. Eleanor made it special. Blade Joe opened the meal right there, the smell of the food spreading. He picked up a fork that was on the table and tried a bit of the meatloaf with gravy. He chewed slowly, evaluating it. Then he nodded in satisfaction. "It's really good," he said, continuing to eat. "Better than the crap Sherry has the girl make at home." The girl, my Sarah. My heart raced, but I kept my face impassive. It wasn't the time yet. I had to be patient, stick to the plan. "Thank you, sir," I murmured, giving a small nod. "I'll be back tomorrow at the same time." I didn't sleep that night. My hand hadn't trembled when I served him that meal, but when I returned to my empty room, I stared at my own hands for a long, long time. These hands, which had once mended my daughter's clothes, had now served death. I knew, in that moment, that Abigail Miller, the seamstress, was truly gone. There's no turning back from a moment like that. The first dose has been served, and with it, Abigail has sealed her own fate, as much as she's sealed his. The real question is, what will this path of vengeance cost her soul in the end? And so it began. Day after day, week after week, month after month, I, Mrs. Eleanor, brought meals to Blade Joe's main spot, gaining their trust, becoming such a familiar part of the landscape that they no longer even noticed my presence. I could be there, arranging the meals on the table, while they talked openly about business, about crimes, about rivals to be eliminated. I was invisible, just as Mama Alara had predicted. An old woman poses no threat, raises no suspicion. Arrogance, you see, is the greatest blind spot of cruel men. To them, I was just a harmless old woman, part of the scenery. They never looked twice, never suspected, because they simply couldn't imagine that someone like me could be a threat. That invisibility was my safest cloak. And so my long, cold war began. Every day, I served meals with a smile, my hands steady, my heart a frozen stone in my chest. In Blade Joe's meal, there was always my special seasoning, not just for him, but for the one who had slapped me, and the one who had laughed as he threw the dirt. Each dose was a prayer of remembrance. I wasn't just serving poison. I was serving them back every second of terror I felt in that coffin, drop by drop. The hardest part wasn't preparing the herbs. The hardest part was looking into their eyes and playing the role of the harmless old Eleanor. Some days, I'd overhear them laughing about some new cruelty, and the rage would boil up so hot I thought the mask would melt off my face. But then I would think of Sarah, and the rage would cool into patient, sharp steel. I was becoming something new, something forged in darkness and tempered by a mother's love. I watched them wither, not with satisfaction, but with a grim sense of inevitability. Their bodies were simply reflecting the poison they had put out into the world for so long. But the most interesting and useful effect for my purposes was the paranoia. The extract of a certain plant, added in minimal but constant doses, began to affect Blade Joe's mind. He became suspicious. He saw enemies everywhere. He suspected betrayal from even his most loyal men. He started accusing rivals of putting curses on him, of having paid some voodoo practitioner to harm his health. "It must be a hex from the Southsiders," I heard him say one day as I was setting out the meals on the table. "Ever since I started feeling sick, business has been going to hell too. Too much of a coincidence." The suspicion spread like a virus. Blade Joe began to push away allies, to execute subordinates he suspected of betrayal. His behavior became erratic, unpredictable. The power structure he had so carefully built began to crumble at the edges. It was during this period that I finally got concrete information about my daughter. Sarah, now 14, was still at Sherry's house in Riverside. According to conversations I overheard at the spot, her situation was not good. Sherry was known for her explosive temper, for treating the maids she brought home badly. "The girl's a wreck," one of the men commented one day when Blade Joe wasn't around. "So thin, it's a pity. Sherry doesn't give her a break, makes her work like a slave. And on top of that, when the boss is in a bad mood because of his pains, the girl is the one who pays the price. I had to get her out of there, and fast." But how? If I simply kidnapped her, Blade Joe would turn the city upside down to find her. And me, if he found out who I really was, I needed to be more subtle, smarter. The opportunity arose a few months later, when Blade Joe's paranoia reached new heights. He was convinced he had a traitor in his inner circle. Someone was poisoning his food, he was sure of it. It got to the point where he made Sherry taste every meal before he did, which resulted in her also starting to feel the effects of my special seasonings. "I'm not eating this crap the girl makes anymore," he shouted during a particularly violent bout of abdominal pain. "I'm sure they're putting something in the food at home." That's when I saw my chance. After serving the meals, while clearing the table, I commented casually, "Excuse me, Mr. Joe. It's none of my business, but I heard you talking about problems with the food at home. If you'd like, I can prepare meals for you to take home too, just like I do here." He looked at me, really saw me for the first time in all those months. "You think you can handle that?" "Of course, son," I replied, using the motherly tone I had perfected. "It's just a few more meals. And I can teach the girl who works at your house too, if you'd like. Sometimes it's just a lack of practice." He considered for a moment, then nodded. "I'll take you there today. Let's see if this solves it." And that's how I first entered Sherry's house, the middle-class apartment in Riverside where my daughter was living as a servant. The place was well decorated, with expensive furniture, but poorly maintained. Sherry, a woman in her 32nd, pretty but with a hard look in her eyes, greeted me with initial suspicion, which turned to relief when she understood I was there to take over some of the cooking. And then, after almost 2 years, I saw my daughter again. Sarah had grown. She was taller, but frighteningly thin. Her eyes had deep, dark circles under them. Her unkempt hair was tied back in a messy ponytail. She was wearing a t-shirt that was too big and worn-out jeans. She looked much older than her 14 years. The urge to run to her, to hug her, to reveal who I was almost irresistible. But I held back. It wasn't the time. One wrong move and I would ruin everything. "This is Sarah," Sherry introduced with a dismissive gesture. "She's the one who cooks here, but she's a disaster. Can't learn anything right." "Nice to meet you, dear," I said, keeping my voice steady despite the emotion choking me. "I'm Mrs. Eleanor. I'm going to teach you some tricks in the kitchen. You'll see. You'll get the hang of it in no time." She briefly looked up, then back down at the floor, but in that brief glance, I saw something that broke my heart. There was no recognition. My own daughter looked into my eyes and didn't see her mother. The disguise was that good, or time and suffering had erased my image from her memory. It felt like someone was squeezing my heart, but I couldn't cry, couldn't allow a single crack in the facade. I had to be Mrs. Eleanor, a stranger, because my daughter's safety was more important than my own pain, and patience, I knew, was the sharpest weapon I possessed. In the following weeks, I established a new routine. In addition to the meals for the crew, I also prepared the meals Blade Joe took home. And 3 times a week, I went to Sherry's apartment to teach Sarah how to cook. It was an excuse to spend time with my daughter, to assess her, to plan how to get her out of that situation. What I saw during these visits only strengthened my resolve to see the plan through to the end. Sarah was constantly mistreated. Sherry treated her like a slave, not like a teenager under her care. Blade Joe, on the rare occasions he was home during my visits, barely looked at her, as if she were a piece of furniture, and I saw marks, bruises on her arms, once a black eye poorly concealed with makeup. You didn't have to be a genius to understand what was happening there. Slowly, I grew closer to Sarah. At first, she was withdrawn. She answered only in monosyllables, avoided eye contact. But over time, as I showed myself to be gentle, patient, interested in her, she began to open up a little. "You're different," she said one day, as we were washing dishes together in the kitchen. Sherry had gone out. We were alone. "You don't yell. You don't get angry when I mess something up." "Everyone makes mistakes, my child," I replied, my heart aching that I couldn't call her my daughter with the real meaning the expression had. "The important thing is to learn." She looked at me for a long moment, her brow furrowed as if trying to remember something. "You know, you remind me of someone." My heart raced. "Oh? Who?" "My mother," she said, her voice low, almost a whisper. "She died 2 years ago. But you have a similar way about you. The way you talk, the way you move your hands when you're explaining something. It was one of the hardest moments of my life. There was my daughter, telling me I reminded her of her mother, who was me, without knowing she was talking to her actual mother. I wanted to hug her, tell her the truth, take her away from there that instant, but I couldn't. Not yet. "Your mother must have been a good person," I said, my voice choked. "She was," Sarah replied, turning her attention back to the dishes. "The best person I ever knew." While I was getting closer to Sarah, I continued with the main plan. Blade Joe's health was gradually worsening. It was no longer just his digestive system. His liver was starting to show signs of failure. His kidneys were barely functioning. The man who had slapped me in the alley, the one with the cruel smile, also received even more concentrated doses of the special seasoning. He collapsed during an operation in the neighborhood and was rushed to the hospital. He didn't survive the night. His death was the trigger for complete chaos. Blade Joe, already paranoid, became convinced that he was the target of a coordinated attack. He began to see conspiracies everywhere, to distrust even his own shadow. He ordered executions, broke alliances, created unnecessary conflicts with factions that were previously allies. The empire he had built so carefully began to crumble rapidly. Territories were lost to rivals. His men deserted to other bosses. The police intensified operations in the area, taking advantage of the organization's weakness. The entire process, from the day I first sold a meal in Portsmouth to the news of Joe's death, took nearly 3 years. The final 2 years of my 5-year plan were spent in quiet observation, ensuring every last thread of his network was unraveled and that no one would ever come looking for me or my daughter. Only then did I truly feel free. In less than 6 months, what had been one of the most powerful groups in Havenwood was reduced to Blade Joe and a handful of men still loyal more out of fear than respect. It was in this context that I finally executed the final phase of the plan. His men deserted to other bosses. The police intensified operations in the area, taking advantage of the organization's weakness. In less than 6 months, what had been one of the most powerful groups in Havenwood was reduced to Blade Joe and a handful of men still loyal more out of fear than respect. It was in this context that I finally executed the final phase of the plan. With Blade Joe weakened, sick, isolated, Sherry's house no longer had the same protection as before. The men who used to provide security had been reassigned to defend what was left of their territory in the neighborhood. It was the perfect time to act. One afternoon, when I knew Sherry would be out, she had mentioned a doctor's appointment, probably suffering from the same symptoms as Blade Joe, since she ate the same food. I went to the apartment for another cooking lesson with Sarah. I brought a small suitcase with me, hidden inside the shopping bag I always carried. "Sarah," I said as soon as we were in the kitchen, closing the door behind me. I need to talk to you about something very serious. She looked at me, confused. What is it, Mrs. Eleanor? I don't have much time to explain, but I'm here to get you out of this place. I know what happens here. I know how they treat you. I've come to take you away. Her eyes widened, a mixture of hope and fear. But how? They'll find me. Joe will kill you if he finds out. Blade Joe won't do anything, I said. My voice firmer, more like my real voice, not the voice of Mrs. Eleanor. He can barely stand on his own, and soon he won't be a problem for anyone. I opened the bag, took out the small suitcase. Put whatever is important to you in here. Quickly, we have to leave before anyone comes back. She hesitated, still not fully understanding what was happening. Why are you doing this? You barely know me. It was the moment I had imagined so many times. Slowly, I took off the thick glasses that were part of my disguise. I ran a hand through my gray hair. The dye was already fading at the roots, showing the natural black underneath. I looked directly into her eyes, letting the mask of Mrs. Eleanor fall, allowing Abigail to appear, even if briefly. I've known you since the day you were born, my child. The shock on her face was immediate. Recognition, disbelief, hope, all mixed together. Mom, she whispered, the word barely audible. It can't be. You died. There was a funeral and everything. I didn't die, I replied, the tears finally flowing freely. They tried to kill me. They buried me alive. But I survived. And I came back for you. Sarah stood frozen for a moment, as if she couldn't process what she was hearing. Then, slowly, she approached. She touched my face with trembling fingers, as if trying to confirm that I was real, not a hallucination. And then, with a sob that seemed to come from the depths of her soul, she hugged me. A desperate hug, like a castaway clinging to a piece of wood in the ocean. I knew there was something familiar about you, she said between sobs. I felt it in my heart, but I thought it was just me missing you, that I was imagining things. I hugged her back, feeling her frail body tremble against mine. How long had I dreamed of this moment? How many nights had I lain awake, imagining what it would be like to hold my daughter in my arms again? This single moment is the reason for everything, the darkness, the deception, the years of patient planning. But even with her daughter safe in her arms, their journey isn't over. Now, they have to escape the ghosts of the past and see if a normal life is still possible. But we couldn't afford to prolong the moment. Every minute was precious. We have to go now, I said, gently pulling away. Get your things, just the most important ones. I'll explain everything later, I promise. She nodded, drying her tears, and ran to her room. She came back minutes later with a small bag. I don't have much, she explained, a little ashamed. Just some clothes and this. She showed me a crumpled photo of the two of us, taken when she was about 10 on a trip to Lake Erie. I hid it when they said you had died. They wouldn't let me keep any memories of you, but I stole this from our house before I came here. That preserved photo, despite everything, was the final confirmation that I had made the right choice. No matter the moral price I had paid, the lines I had crossed, my daughter was worth all of it and more. We left the apartment quickly, without looking back. I had it all planned. A car was waiting for us a few blocks away, arranged by Samuel, who remained a precious ally. We would go to Mama Elara's house first, where we would spend a few days until it was safe to continue to our final destination. Marietta, in Ohio, where no one knew us, where we could start a new life. And Blade Joe? Sarah asked as we got in the car. And Sherry? Are they going to come after us? No, I replied with a certainty that came from knowing what I had done. They won't be able to. Blade Joe won't last more than a few weeks in his condition. And Sherry? Well, she's not doing so well either. Sarah looked at me, a slow understanding dawning in her eyes. What did you do, Mom? What needed to be done? I replied simply. To survive, to get you back, to get justice. We left Ohio that same night. Samuel drove nonstop to Marietta, taking back roads to avoid any chance of being followed. Sarah slept most of the way, exhausted after the emotional shock of our reunion and the sudden escape. I stayed awake, vigilant, checking the rearview mirror every few minutes, as if at any moment I might see Blade Joe's men following us. But no one came after us. As I had predicted, Blade Joe was too busy trying to save what was left of his crumbling empire, besides dealing with his own rapidly deteriorating health. Months later, we learned from Samuel, who kept in touch with acquaintances in Ohio, that Blade Joe had died, officially of natural causes. Multiple organ failure, they said. The justice that men couldn't deliver, nature, with a little help from my knowledge of herbs, did. We arrived in Marietta on a cold June morning. The small, historic town, with its brick streets and old churches, seemed the complete opposite of Havenwood, a place where no one knew us, where we could start over. Mama Elora had arranged for us to stay with a distant cousin of hers for a few weeks while we looked for a place. With the small savings I had managed to accumulate selling lunches and some extra money that Mama Elora insisted on lending us, we were able to rent a simple little house on the outskirts of town. The floors are just dirt, I explained to Sarah as I opened the door to our new home. But we'll fix it up over time. The important thing is that it's ours. She looked around, her big eyes taking in every detail of the small but clean space. Then she turned to me with a smile. The first genuine smile I had seen on her face since our reunion. It's perfect, Mom. The first few months were about adjusting. Sarah was traumatized by her time at Sherry's house, by the abuse she suffered. She had frequent nightmares, sudden panic attacks. I also carried my own scars, physical and emotional. But we were together again, and that's what mattered. We needed a source of income. My knowledge of cooking and medicinal herbs, learned from Mama Elora, was our salvation. I started making homemade sweets, apple butter, fudge, peach preserves, which I sold at the local farmer's market. I also prepared natural remedies, teas, salves, tinctures for simple ailments, Grandma's remedies, as the locals soon began to call them. The business grew slowly, organically. We didn't want to draw attention, so we kept everything small, modest, just enough to support ourselves comfortably. Over time, the house improved. We put in flooring, painted the walls, planted a garden in the back. It wasn't luxury, but it was a home, a safe home. Sarah, slowly, began to heal. The scared, fragile girl gave way to a determined young woman. She went back to school, finishing high school in record time. When she expressed a desire to study nursing, I did everything to support her. I worked double shifts. I saved every penny so she could study at the college in Ohio University. Why nursing? I once asked, curious about her choice. Because of you, Mom, she replied, her eyes fixed on mine. Because of what you did to save me. I want to help people too. In a different way, maybe, but I want to help. That filled me with a pride mixed with guilt. Pride for the person my daughter had become, despite everything. Guilt for the means I used to save her, for the dark path I had walked. The years passed. Sarah graduated, got a job at a hospital in Columbus. She would come home on weekends, but I knew she would soon build her own life, far from Marietta, far from me. It was the natural course of things, and I was happy that she had that opportunity. Then came the big surprise. One ordinary afternoon, Sarah came home earlier than usual, accompanied by a young man, tall, thin, shy manner, a history teacher at the same school where she taught first aid as a volunteer. Mom, this is David, she introduced, a special sparkle in her eyes that didn't escape me. We're dating. The courtship was quick. Less than a year later, they were married. The ceremony was simple, in the local little church, with only a few close friends as guests. Sarah was radiant in the simple white dress I had helped her sew. Yes, I had taught her real sewing skills, not just the ones I pretended to teach when I was Mrs. Eleanor. Seeing her happy, walking towards a normal life, was like a balm for my tired soul. It was as if finally all the sacrifice, all the pain, all the blood on my hands had been worth it. My daughter was free, safe, loved. It was all I ever wanted. It was shortly after her wedding that I made a difficult decision, a decision I carry with me to this day, at 71, sitting on this porch in Marietta, looking at the hills while I make my apple butter. Sarah and David had moved to Columbus, where they both worked. They visited regularly, but they had their own lives. I was genuinely happy for them. but I was also worried. Worried that my past, my actions, might one day catch up with them, that someone from Ohio, by some twist of fate, would recognize me, make the connection between Abigail Miller and the woman who slowly poisoned Blade Joe and his gang. More than that, I was worried about the weight my story placed on Sarah's shoulders. She never spoke openly about what she knew or suspected about my methods of revenge. She never asked for details about how exactly Blade Joe had died or what had happened to Sherry, who I later learned also passed away, officially from causes related to substance abuse. But I knew the truth. It was like an unspoken agreement between us. Some things were better left unsaid. So when Sarah called me to tell me, her voice overflowing with joy, that she was pregnant, I made my decision. My grandchildren, and yes, there ended up being two, twins. A boy and a girl didn't need to carry the weight of my past. They didn't need to know that their grandmother had been buried alive and then came back to take revenge, serving death in small portions along with rice and beans. "Mom, do you want to come live with us in Columbus?" Sarah asked after the twins were born. "It would be nice to have you around to help with the kids." "No, my daughter," I replied gently. "My place is here in Marietta, but I'll come visit as often as I can." And so it was. I kept enough distance so that my grandchildren would grow up knowing only Grandma Abigail, the lady who made delicious sweets and homemade remedies for any problem. Never the woman who had been capable of planning and executing a revenge plot over 5 years. Never the woman who had survived 9 days buried alive, drinking her own blood to keep from dying of thirst. Sometimes, when I'm alone, I open the notebook I keep in a box under my bed. A simple notebook with a black cover, which to anyone else would look like just a recipe book or a diary. But inside, everything is recorded. Names, dates, substances used, symptoms observed. Every man I helped eliminate, every step of my revenge plan, meticulously documented, as if a part of me needed that concrete proof that it all really happened. Along with the notebook, I keep the hummingbird brooch. It still has dark bloodstains that never came out completely. Sometimes I touch those stains with my fingertips, remembering how that small object saved my life, how it allowed me to survive long enough to be rescued, to come back, to get justice, to get my daughter back. Every year on the anniversary of my death, the day Blade Joe had me buried alive, I light a candle. Not for him, of course, nor for the man who slapped me, nor for any of the others I helped send to the other side. The candle is for the innocents, for the collateral victims of the drug war, for the workers who died at the hands of that gang, for the women who were abused, for the young people who were recruited as children, for the destroyed families, and, in a way, for myself too, for the woman I was before all this happened, for the simple seamstress who just wanted to raise her daughter in peace, and who was forced to transform into something she never imagined she could be. The scars from those 9 days never completely disappeared. The physical ones are the most obvious, the marks on my arms, where I repeatedly cut myself to drink my own blood. That's why I always wear long-sleeved blouses, even in the most intense Ohio heat. "It's an old woman's habit," I say when someone comments. I get cold easily, but the psychological scars are the deepest. I've never completely overcome the fear of enclosed spaces. I can't go into elevators. I take the stairs, no matter how many floors. I don't use public transport, where people are packed against each other during peak hours. I sleep with the windows open, even on the coldest winter nights when the temperature drops near freezing. I need to feel the air circulating, to know that I'm not trapped. The nightmares still come, though less frequently. I wake up in a cold sweat, feeling the weight of the earth on my chest, the darkness swallowing me. On those nights, I get up, turn on all the lights in the house, make some tea, and sit on the porch, watching the stars until morning comes, reminding myself that I survived, that I'm free, that I won. Another scar, less visible but just as deep, is the moral conflict I carry. Was what I did right? Was it justifiable? Killing is always wrong. I learned that as a child. But to let men like Blade Joe, who destroyed so many lives, including almost my own, go unpunished, wouldn't that also be a form of evil? There was no justice system that could touch him. The police were either bought off or intimidated. The judges turned a blind eye. Who would bring justice if not me? Revenge is a dish best served cold, the saying goes. And I served mine ice cold, calculated over 5 years. But what no one tells you is that this dish, as satisfying as it may be at the moment, leaves a bitter taste in your mouth afterward. A taste that never completely goes away, no matter how many years pass. I don't regret surviving. I don't regret saving my daughter. But sometimes I wonder if there was another way, if I could have achieved the same results without becoming, in a way, as cruel as those I fought. If, in fighting monsters, I didn't become a bit of a monster myself, as that famous saying goes. Time went on. My grandchildren grew up, became teenagers, then adults. Sarah and David continued their careers, building a stable, normal life. I remained in Marietta with my sweets and homemade remedies, my herb garden, my quiet life. A common old lady in everyone's eyes, with an extraordinary past that almost no one knew. Sometimes, people from town come to me for advice, not just about remedies for a cold or a backache, but about life. Problems with children, marriage difficulties, tough decisions to make. It seems that years and wrinkles bring with them a presumption of wisdom. And maybe, in fact, I have learned a few things over this very unusual life. What saved me was not hatred, but patience. I often tell the younger women who come for advice, I learned that even underground, you can still plan for the future. I don't tell the full story, of course. Just fragments, metaphors, lessons distilled from the extreme experiences I lived. Some of these women faced difficult situations, abusive husbands, harassing bosses, toxic family members. I don't recommend my specific solution, obviously, but I teach about the importance of strategic patience, of careful planning, of self-preservation in extreme situations. Every situation requires a different response, I explain. Sometimes running is the answer. Sometimes staying and fighting. Sometimes, as in my case, you have to pretend to be someone else for a while until you gain the strength to be who you really are. Violence transforms the one who wields it, even when it's for justice. This is perhaps the hardest lesson I learned. I did not emerge unscathed from my revenge, even though I achieved my goals. Part of me was left in that coffin buried in the foothills. Another part was lost in the 5 years I lived as Mrs. Eleanor, serving death in small portions. I survived, yes. I won, in a way. But at what cost to my own soul? That's why, when women come to me for advice on how to handle extreme situations, I first talk about survival, about how to identify real danger, how to protect yourself, how to create support networks, about how sometimes you have to yield temporarily to win in the long run, about how time can be an ally if we know how to use it. My story is one of survival, not heroism, I tell them. I did what I had to do to survive and protect my daughter, but that doesn't mean there were no consequences, that I didn't pay a price. Today, at 71, sitting on the porch of my house in Marietta, looking at the mountains while I prepare apple butter from fruit picked in my own yard, I think about the whole journey that brought me here. Of the 9 days, buried alive, drinking my own blood to keep from dying of thirst. Of the 5 years, serving death in small portions to the men who tried to kill me. Of the desperate escape with my daughter to the patient building of a new life far from all that. It was a life I never imagined I would have. A life marked by extremes, extreme suffering, extreme determination, extreme revenge, but also by moments of unexpected beauty. The reunion with my daughter, the birth of my grandchildren, the peace of my current days in Marietta, where time passes more slowly, where the mountains remind me daily that there are things that endure, that resist, just as I resisted. If I could go back in time, would I do it all the same? I don't know. That's a question that haunts me on sleepless nights, when the nightmares visit and I remember the taste of my own blood in my mouth, the absolute darkness of the coffin, the weight of the earth above me, or when I open the black notebook and see the meticulous list of the men I helped eliminate, the dates, the substances, the symptoms. Maybe there was another way. Maybe not. What I know is that I survived, that my daughter survived, that we managed, against all odds, to build a life after hell. And maybe that, in the end, is what matters. The hummingbird brooch is still in its little box, the bloodstains a permanent reminder of the price of survival. The hummingbird is small, but brave, my mother used to say. Like me, I seemed fragile, but I found strength I didn't know I had. Like all women who face the impossible and somehow win. In the end, I think that's what I want to leave as a legacy. Not the story of my revenge, as cinematic as it may seem, but the lesson that even in the most desperate situations, there is always a possibility of survival, of a new beginning. That even when buried alive, you can still plan, you can still fight, you can still dream of the day you will see the sun again. The apple butter bubbles in the pot, spreading its sweet aroma through the kitchen. I stir the mixture slowly, the way my mother taught me so many years ago. Some knowledge is passed down from generation to generation, surviving time, tragedies, transformations. Like me, my story will live on in the hearts of those who hear it and find in it some meaning, a lesson, or some hope. I am Abigail Miller, and this is the story of my life. 9 days buried alive and 5 years serving death. What part of my story impressed you more? The 9 days of survival underground, or the 5 years of a revenge plot calculated down to the last detail? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. My story is just one of many about incredible women you will find. They are warriors who have faced impossible odds. They emerge from the darkness, perhaps not whole, perhaps covered in scars, but stronger, wiser, and above all, alive to tell their tales. To ensure you don't miss any of these inspiring stories, hit the subscribe button now.